Welcome to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. Ralph Menzies' execution is called off by the Utah Supreme Court days before he was set to die by firing squad. An enormous homeless campus is coming to Utah, but there's a major funding hurdle to overcome. And Utah demands that U.S. Magnesium stop pumping massive amounts of water from the Great Salt Lake. Joining me today are Salt Lake Tribune investigative reporter Jessica Streifels. Jessica, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Westside Communities reporter Jose Davila IV is with us. Thank you, Jose.
Thanks for having me too, Tom. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And later in the program, we'll hear from water and land use reporter Leah Larson. Let's start with Jessica Streifels. You've been covering this potential execution of Ralph Menzies. So tell me about this latest ruling from the Supreme Court.
Sure. So Ralph Menzies has been on death row for nearly 40 years now, and he's getting older and he has vascular dementia. And so his attorneys have been arguing that he doesn't understand what's really happening anymore. And according to our constitutions, the government is not allowed to execute people if they don't understand what's happening, why they're being executed. And so the attorneys have been arguing that he's just not competent to be executed. And this appeal went up to the Utah Supreme Court. And last Friday, which was less than a week that he was supposed to be scheduled to die by a firing squad, the Utah Supreme Court overturned a district court judge's determination that more competency evaluations weren't needed. So basically, the Utah Supreme Court says we do need to look at his competency again because dementia is progressive and he's getting worse. We need to ensure that he is actually competent and understands what's happening in order to execute him.
So about a year ago, he had an evaluation. I guess he was cleared at that point, but his lawyers are saying, well, the dementia's advanced in the ensuing year.
Right, exactly. And that's how dementia works, right? It's a progressive disease. And so it's not surprising, I guess, that they'd make that argument now. But, it took, when they initially made the claim that he had dementia and this needed to be evaluated, that process took like a year. And so now here we are a year later, the judge did determine that he was competent, but the evaluations he used are quite old now. And so the argument the attorneys are making is like today, he is not competent the way he might have been 1 year ago or 15 months ago, whenever it was that those evaluations were done.
I think the state argues that they've cited phone calls that Ralph Menzies has with his friends and families that he seems okay in those calls.
Yeah, exactly. And those calls have been put under seal. So the public doesn't know what was said, but they reference them all the time in these hearings in the last couple of weeks. And basically, all phone calls are recorded when you call someone from prison. And so they got a copy of these phone calls and they say, he sounds like he can understand the news. He's talking about, world events, and he's holding conversations with his family members, understands who they are. And so that, they say, is evidence that he does have the competency and that he does understand what's going on around him. And so therefore, there's no legal reason why he shouldn't be executed.
So tell us why he's on death row.
Right, sure. So in 1986, he kidnapped a gas station clerk. Her name was Maureen Hunsaker, and he took her up to the Storm Mountain area in Big Cottonwood Canyon and killed her up there. And so that's the crime that got him on death row.
What does Maureen Hunsaker's family say about this?
I mean, they have been extremely pro death penalty. They really truly believe that this person being executed is justice and the only way that they will find closure. And so I think this ruling was very devastating for them. They asked for privacy, so we didn't really get into a whole lot of conversation with them. But they've been waiting for decades and decades for this outcome. And with this new ruling, it does go back down to the district court. They will do more competency evaluations, but I think it really does call into question whether Menzies will ever be executed, just given how frail he is. who knows how much longer he has in his life. He might die naturally before this competency proceedings are finished. So I think that it was a real blow to them after a very, very frustrating, almost 40-year journey in the criminal justice system.
And this is not atypical, right? These cases tend to drag on for decades.
Yeah, I mean, that's really becoming the norm these days. We had an execution last year that I've come on the show and talked about, and he was waiting for, I think, maybe 25 years, and that was relatively short. I mean, we've got people on death row who have, most of them are in their 50s and 60s, and there's only about 4 or 6. There's not that many men on death row in Utah anymore, but it's been quite some time since there's been a new death penalty case and conviction in Utah, and most of the men who are on death row have been waiting for literally decades for their cases to continue to play out.
I believe you witnessed the previous one. I can't even remember when that was. Last year?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
That was lethal injection, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Now this one, Ralph Menzies is grandfathered in. I guess that if you're newly convicted and sent to death row, you can't choose firing squad, but he did.
Yeah, that's right. So all of the men who, including Tabor Honey, who was executed last year, all of the men who are on death row right now were all convicted prior to the law change. So all of them have the choice to die by lethal injection or firing squad. And so it was interesting reading through the archives on Ralph Menzies' case. And, this is a trial from the 1980s. He decided right after the judge sentenced him, the judge asked him, what method would you like to be executed by? And he kind of seemed distracted. And then he said, "Oh, just shoot me." And so that was how he decided, 37 whatever years ago, that he was going to die by firing squad, was telling the judge to just shoot him.
I don't know if this helps or hurts the family of Maureen Hunsaker. Do we know? Did Ralph Menzies speak at his trial? Do we have a motive for this? Was it just robbery?
He's actually never admitted that he did this crime, though the physical evidence of it is pretty overwhelming. I don't think that, there's been any court that seriously considered innocence claims like you've heard about. I mean, there's been a lot of other death row cases where innocence was a legitimate argument. I don't think that any courts or appellate courts have really considered his innocence claim, but he's never really said, even admitted that he did this. When he was younger, from reading the archives, it seems like he was much more, defiant. He was swearing at prosecutors in trial and things like that. And that's very different from the man that is in court today. He never speaks. He is in a wheelchair. He uses an oxygen tank. He does appear to be very frail. And so, yeah, the Ralph Menzies of today is not someone who's, speaking much or making a lot of statements in the courtroom.
Apparently, at the original trial, the defense team brought at least a witness to talk about abuse that Ralph Menzies has suffered himself.
Yeah, that's right. When they do these death penalty trials, they have, kind of the penalty phase where it's like, you've been found guilty of the murder. Now, do you get the death penalty or not? And so it's a defense attorney's job to present evidence of reasons why their client shouldn't be executed. And for Ralph Menzies, he had, a pretty traumatic childhood with, I think, multiple stepfathers that were physically abusive to him. He was in and out of the juvenile court system from a very, very young age. And so that was kind of some of the evidence that was presented then to try to convince the judge to not order an execution. But I think that was a challenging argument for the defense attorneys to make when at that time, Ralph Menzies had committed other crimes before this homicide. He was on parole when he committed this homicide. I think he robbed a gas station clerks in other places several times. So the judge kind of was not more convinced that he was a danger to society because of all of this crime that he had been doing prior to murdering Maureen Hunsaker. And so that was more convincing to the judge than the evidence surrounding the hardships from his childhood.
In the story, Ralph Menzies denied that he did this, but the evidence is pretty to me, pretty pretty clear. Tell me about that.
Yeah, of course, this is just from a lot. I mean, this is all taken from archive reporting, but from what I've been reading in our past Tribune coverage, he there was a lot of physical evidence that tied him to the case. Like her DNA was found inside the car he was driving. Her purse was found in his apartment. Her ID was found in the Salt Lake County jail, I think in a garbage can or something. He'd been arrested for another crime and was in the booking area, and then they found her ID in that same booking area shortly after he was arrested. So there was quite a lot of physical evidence that pointed to him as being the primary suspect and the person that killed her.
Tell me a little bit more about the family. This kind of the spokesperson, the son. He was I don't know, 10 years old or something, right, when he lost his mother.
Yeah, so he was the oldest child, and a lot of her other children spoke, or her two other children spoke during a commutation hearing for Ralph Menzies that was held last month. And for those kids, Matt Hunsaker remembers his mom, but his siblings, her daughter was like 6 months old, and the middle son was just a toddler as well, and so for them, they don't really remember who she was a lot. They remember she was working really hard for their family, which is why she was working at that gas station late in the evening. But that family has really been, they've not stepped back in the last almost 40 years. They've been at every single court hearing, whether that's been, Maureen's parents who have now passed on. And so now Matt Hunsaker has kind of taken that point of being the spokesperson, I guess, for the family, but they've been incredibly involved in this whole process and very outspoken about how they want the outcome of this case to be Ralph Menzies' execution.
And they're saying, you say that they want his execution for closure. Is that what they're saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think for them, they believe that this will give them closure, that this is justice, and so it's very important to them that be the outcome, that he doesn't die naturally, that it is a firing squad death, or that he is executed.
So what is next? I guess it goes back to that district judge, and there'll be an evaluation.
Yeah, it goes back to the district court judge, and there'll be another round of competency evaluations. The Attorney General's office, I think yesterday or maybe in the last week, they filed motions to expedite the process. Like they really kind of want to, make sure this doesn't take a year like it did last time. So they're really putting pressure to do this very quickly. It seems like they're not backing down from trying to, reschedule the execution. So that's what will happen next. There'll be more competency evaluations. Experts again will say, does he understand what's happening? Does he understand his crime and why he's getting the death penalty? And if the judge determines that he is competent, then they'll reschedule another date for an execution. And if he's not competent, then that's just kind of the end of the case. He'll just die in prison of natural causes.
We've been talking with Salt Lake Tribune investigative reporter Jessica Schreifels. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate that. We're going to head toward a break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. Here's the headline when we come back. An enormous homeless campus is coming to Utah, but there's a major funding hurdle to overcome. We'll be talking with Westside Communities reporter Jose Davila IV. We'll have more following this break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. We turn next to Salt Lake Tribune Westside Communities reporter Jose Davila IV. Jose, thank you.
Of course. Happy to be here, Tom.
Great to have you. Here's the headline. An enormous homeless campus is coming to Utah, but there's a major funding hurdle to overcome. Let me give a little bit of history. I guess when I last kind of checked in, what you and I have talked about this on this program before, the powers that be, the homeless services officials, in years past had kind of gone to this dispersed Not a big campus, but
Mhm.
satellite campuses. I guess they've obviously reversed their thinking. Is that the case?
Yeah, that is largely the case here. Right now, the backbone of homeless services and emergency shelter in Utah and in the Salt Lake Valley are three smaller homeless resource centers that were established after the closure of the large Rio Grande shelter downtown as a part of 2017's Operation Rio Grande. Uh, these homeless resource centers, two of which are in Salt Lake City and one is in South Salt Lake, are only about 300 or 200 beds. This new campus that the Homeless Services Board has pushed for um, is 13. It will be able to host 1,300 beds.
Okay, so they just needed a lot more room, I guess. It's been announced. So tell us where this new large campus is going to be.
So the campus is going to go on a currently Salt Lake City owned parcel along 2200 West in Salt Lake City's North Point neighborhood. The neighborhood is kind of known for its agriculture, its rural vibe. Maybe its biggest draw is Cross E Ranch, which is a kind of a farm that does agricultural tourism. They host a fall festival and a sunflower festival. Um, it's also been marked recently by larger industrial development, some of which is distribution warehouses, but also some manufacturing as well. It's kind of a rural corner of Salt Lake City. There aren't even sidewalks on the road outside of where the campus is going to be built. There is no public transit. Somebody would have to walk about a mile and a half to get to the nearest bus stop. It's in a little bit of an odd place, away from the main stem of the valley.
So originally they said they wanted 30 or more acres. They got 16. Is that? I guess that's going to be enough.
Yeah, when I talked to state homeless coordinator Wayne Niederhauser about that, he made the point that they had really looked far and wide. He said he had looked at dozens of possible locations and parcels. And this one ticked the most boxes, even though it didn't tick all of the boxes. And one of those boxes was a campus of 30 acres. This one is 16. He still expressed confidence that they would be able to build space for these 1,300 beds, as well as office spaces for other services to be provided to the people staying there.
So before we get to those services and some other potential problems, this is from the second paragraph of your story. This site poses some risk of buildings sinking in the event of an earthquake. I guess they got a plan for that.
Yeah, it did not seem to be a particular worry for Niederhauser when I spoke to him. He said there was a moderate risk of liquefaction, which is what the scientific term for that process is called. I assume there is some engineering and some seismic retrofitting that will be achievable and isn't going to stop the state from building here.
So what's the vision for this? You got 1,300 beds, obviously, but they want more. They want services. Tell me what the vision is.
So the vision is a quote homeless campus, where this is the centralized hub of a hub and spoke model of providing services and assistance and shelter to those that are experiencing homelessness. I think the state wants this to be kind of the first place people go, and possibly a one-stop shop where people can get shelter, can get food, can get connected to healthcare, case management, all that sort of stuff, so that they can get back to living on their own and living in a house, an apartment, and being healthy and productive. And so the biggest perhaps concern with the current model, the homeless resource centers, is that those resources aren't really are hard to get to at the resource centers. There, a lot of people need to leave the shelter to go to appointments or go to other things, and this puts it all in one place and makes it more accessible for everyone staying there. Just as an aside, the Niederhauser said the homeless resource centers will stay open, and because, simply put, the state still needs shelter for people, still needs those beds, but it's yet to be determined how those homeless resource centers will serve those needing shelter. Whether for example, whether they'll house specific subpopulations of homeless Utahns, like women or families, that sort of thing.
So you did mention this is kind of a mile and a half or something from the nearest bus stop. How are they going to solve that problem?
So the state will run a shuttle service, more frequent than one that currently exists for the homeless resource centers. The drop-off points have yet to be determined. Spokesperson Sarah Nielsen with the Office of Homeless Services would not share those details with me, and said the plan was still being worked on. So it's likely to be kind of a cycling shuttle system. It needs to be frequent, and it needs to have more shuttles than what they've got right now. There's a sizable population of homeless Utahns that work and will certainly be working off of this campus, and so need a way to get there. There's also, people might, like I was mentioning before, might need to leave to go to healthcare appointments or, go to the DMV to get documents, whatever the case may be. They're putting the location of the campus is due to be a bit of a headache.
Mm-hmm. Cost is a bit of a concern. What's it going to cost to build all this? And then there's the ongoing yearly cost, right?
Yeah, there is a large funding gap for this right now. Legislators had already appropriated $23 million to build and acquire land for this campus. However, Niederhauser and his staff estimate that it's going to cost $75 million to get the whole thing up and running. So obviously that's about a $50 million gap. Niederhauser said they'll be looking to raise that money from a variety of places, not just the state. We're going to ask the county to chip in, going to ask Salt Lake City to chip in, and then go after some philanthropic dollars as well. On the ongoing funding part, again, none of that is appropriated. And Niederhauser expects it to cost about $34 million, at least $34 million to run initially each year.
And that's, I guess, they'll look for appropriation from the legislature for that?
Correct. Yeah. Right now, staff are working to get an appropriation like that into Governor Spencer Cox's proposed budget. He always proposes the budget, right? And then the legislature tweaks it or completely tears it up. They have the right to do that. And then that's the first step in kind of getting it before the legislature.
Mm-hmm. What are neighbors saying? There are folks living. It's kind of a rural area, but it's become a manufacturing area. But there are people living there.
Yeah, there's a lot of frustration, I think, especially around the kind of secrecy that the state has operated during this search. They have not held very many public meetings. They have decided and thought about and discussed this campus behind closed doors. The Homeless Services Board has since they first said we need to build the campus in October of 24. And so it's been frustrating and even blindsiding to some neighbors that this parcel has been chosen. They also share concerns about public safety and worried about people experiencing homelessness wandering through the neighborhood and trespassing. There's a lot of outbuildings in this neighborhood, right? There's people with barns and so forth. So some neighbors are concerned that people are going to wander onto their land and get into their barns and that sort of thing. Others have also said repeatedly, brought up the concerns about transportation as well, and have shared that they don't think this campus can be effective given where it is and how hard it's going to be, they say, to access it.
When is it going to be finished, the campus, do officials say?
Right now, officials are saying it'll be open in 2027, which is a significant delay from when the Homeless Services Board originally wanted to have it open, which was next month. Mm-hmm. So there's a ways to go before this opens, including two more, at least 2 more winters in which cities and counties across Utah will be asked to come up with winter response plans and temporarily expand the number of beds that are available, especially on the coldest winter nights.
All right, thanks for telling us about this. We have a bit of time left in this segment, Jose. Here's the headline. Utah violinist arrested and held by ICE has been released on bond. So who is this and why was he arrested?
This is the story of John Shin. He came to the U.S. when he was 10 years old on a visa. He normally would have been eligible for DACA protection and perhaps at one point had DACA protection, but then was convicted and pleaded guilty to a charge of impaired driving along I-80 in Tooele County in 2020. He was detained by ICE on August 18th and was being held in the Aurora kind of ICE contract detention facility, Aurora, Colorado, that is. And he's a classical violinist. He studied at the University of Utah, led the Chamber Music Society of Salt Lake City, has taught violin at some of the big private schools down here, the McGillis School and Roland Hall, and was working as a studio violinist as well. So there was a lot of people that knew him and knew of his work and had seen him perform and performed with him. So he was a kind of a high-profile arrest and case.
So good news for Mr. Chen. I guess it looks like the government's not going to appeal the judge's ruling here.
Correct. The judge ruled that he could be released on bond. She set a high bond, is what his lawyer told me, of $25,000. They were able to pay it. In these cases, or at this particular stage of these cases, the federal government can file a form that basically allows them to designate somebody a national security threat. And in past administrations, that form was narrowly used for that purpose. However, Adam Craik, Shin's lawyer, had told me that he's seeing the federal government file more of these forms that are basically appeals and allow the federal government to detain that person for longer. And he was worried that was going to happen in this case, but in fact, it did not. The government did not appeal. So they were able to post bond, I believe, on Wednesday, and John is on his way back.
So his hope ultimately be get a green card and maybe become a citizen, I suppose.
Yeah.
Right?
So I mean, they have to sort out this case against him first. lawyers have filed a motion to dismiss. They're going to transfer the case back to Utah, or try to transfer the case back to Utah, where Shin lives, and has lived for quite a long time. And then once the case is resolved, then the green card kind of application starts in earnest. They have already put that form in, but my understanding is the case needs to be done, and then they'll go for a green card.
All right. We've been talking with Westside Communities reporter Jose Davila IV. Jose, thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Tom.
Well, it's time for Underplayed Stories of the Week. That's because we have a recorded interview with Leah Larson at the end of the program. So we'll do Underplayed Stories right now. Jessica Streifels, what's your Underplayed story?
So I think Robert Guthrie has been doing some great reporting following this gerrymandering lawsuit where lawmakers have been ordered to draw new congressional maps for elections. So there's not one story I'm pointing out, but he's really on top of all these developments, and it's worth checking out his coverage on our website.
Yes, sltrib.com for all of that great coverage, yes. Jose Davila IV, what's your Underplayed story?
I really enjoyed reading Emily Anderson Stern's story about abortion data. The headline is "More Utahns Have Had Abortions Since the Dobbs Decision, but the state is sharing drastically less about why." It's just a really interesting look into how state government operates, and just some of the real thorny, both ethical and statistical issues with collecting abortion data right now.
All right, you can check that out at sltrib.com as well. Well, we've been talking with Salt Lake Tribune investigative reporter Jessica Streifels. Jessica, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Westside Communities reporter Jose Davila IV has been with us. Jose, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Have a good one.
Okay, you too. Coming up following a break, we're going to be talking about this headline. Utah demands that U.S. Magnesium stop pumping massive amounts of water from the Great Salt Lake. We'll be talking with water and land use reporter Leah Larson. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams, and stay with us through the break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. Here's the headline we'll be talking about in this segment of the program. Utah demands that U.S. Magnesium stop pumping massive amounts of water from the Great Salt Lake. And joining me now is Salt Lake Tribune water and land use reporter Leah Larson. Leah, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about this. I think this is an issue that's really struck a nerve with a lot of Utahns, so a lot to discuss.
Yeah, certainly. First of all, what is, I guess the point is U.S. Magnesium used to be operating. I guess they're kind of operating. Tell me about that now.
Yeah, it's been kind of a mystery to me for the last several months, but so your listeners will probably recall that the U.S. Magnesium had to shut down its plant in 2021 due to equipment failure. And then, of course, in 2024, they laid off the majority of their workforce. But in reading some documents, like historical documents, some court documents, I guess U.S. Magnesium, their electrolysis process, the cells, if they don't work, they start to deteriorate. They're the cells that create molten salt, and that's how they're able to extract magnesium from the magnesium chloride salt that they're producing. And if those cells shut down for any period of time, they start to deteriorate and they become very expensive to fix based on what U.S. Magnesium has reported. So 2021 was several years ago. But I regularly check the Division of Water Rights data just to see, what's going on. And I noticed that U.S. Magnesium has still continued to withdraw a lot of water from the Great Salt Lake, even though its Rowley production plant has been shut down. So I've just had so many questions about that. So I think it was back in June or July, I bugged the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, which issues the leases on the lake bed that the mineral companies use because they manage state lands and the lake bed is state lands. So I just asked them, do you know why they're still siphoning water when their production plant is shut down? What is going on? And they kind of dodged and said because they're going through litigation, which they initiated back in December, that they couldn't really talk about it. So I've just kind of continued to bug them and bug them in the weeks since. And I think it partly they were just super busy with all the wildfires because they are the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. And this has been a record year for fires. So they've just been very, very busy this summer. But finally, after bugging them for a few months, they showed me this letter they issued the middle of last month, the middle of August, to US Magnesium, where among several things they told them to stop pumping water because they were quote unquote not legally quote unquote producing minerals. So yeah, that it raised even more questions, but I was finally able to get US Magnesium to respond to my questions, and what they're doing, I guess, is just producing salts that they're giving to other companies to package and sell for things like dust suppression and to melt ice in the winter. So it sounds like that's what they're using the water for, but it sounds like the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands is not too happy about that. So
U.S. Magnesium says, "Hey, we're not using that much water comparatively." What? Give me the comparison.
yeah, well, they say in recent years it's 1.5% of total depletions from the lake. And I haven't verified that. I think mineral companies combined account for maybe like 5 to 8% of total depletions, which compared to like farms and cities, as they pointed out, is small. But I don't know of like an individual farm or an individual household, or business that contributes quite that much to depletions from the Great Salt Lake. So while it may seem small in the scheme of things, we're still talking about a very large volume of water that they're pulling out of the lake and just kind of evaporating into the air.
So the company's had a series of blows against it, right? Tell me a little bit about that. It's to my mind, it's a wonder they're still in business.
Yeah, well, we'll see how long. Yeah, they have had, I mean, for decades, they've just kind of been problematic, right? They were declared Superfund site in the aughts. And as you know, Superfund sites are just kind of the worst of the worst of contaminated sites in the nation where the EPA steps in and gets involved. So they've been in a Superfund site for more than 2 decades. They've had many, 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 many violations with the state over the years. Um, and then things just seem to really compound post-pandemic, or I guess post when they had to shut down their plant because of the equipment failure. Um, things just kind of really compounded for them. They had tried to pivot into lithium production because lithium prices were really taking off, so they were starting to mine their waste piles to get lithium, which seemed really promising, honestly, because it didn't mean more depletion from the lake. They could just use it from existing material. But then the lithium prices took a nosedive in 2024. They got hit with these fines from the state for all their violations. They had to lay off their workforce because the plant was shut down, the lithium wasn't panning out. And then the state filed a lawsuit against them late last year. And then, as we learned recently, only recently, they had initiated proceedings to revoke their decades-old lease, the lease they've had since the 1960s. Now the state is trying to cancel that. So yeah, things just seem to sort of be collapsing for this company at a rapid rate.
Tell me about that. That's one of the things the Utah division is concerned about, right? The waste, right, which is I guess still there, and there are they continuing to add to that?
Yeah, I think the state is concerned about a lot of things, the waste being one of the things. But yes, so when you produce magnesium from salt, it produces a lot of toxic stuff. It produces chlorine, and chlorine, can be pretty deadly if not handled carefully. It produces all these other kinds of corrosive materials that the state has claimed that they are just like deliberately placing on the state-owned lake bed, which they're not too happy about. And then, of course, now that they're underwater financially because their plant's not operating, they've been hit with all these lawsuits. They're just worried that maybe the money's not there for them to clean up. And it seems like they were supposed to be building a retaining wall for the waste pond to keep it from spilling into the Great Salt Lake. That all stopped last year because they couldn't pay their bills. They have an older, like not waste pond they're not using anymore that they were supposed to put a salt cap on, according to their agreements with EPA. It's not clear whether that's going to happen. So it's just kind of in limbo in some ways and kind of a mess in some ways. So we'll see what happens. There's plenty more to the story, of
Yeah.
course.
So there are lawsuits, right, on both sides. Did I read that correctly? What? Tell me about the lawsuits.
Well, so most of the lawsuits that I went over were just, of course, the lawsuit that the state filed because they're not happy that they're not keeping their agreements, their environmental cleanup agreements. So the state stepped in and asked for a receiver to be appointed, which is like this third party that's going to step in and make sure they're following all their environmental agreements made with the federal government and the state. So that happened in December. And then just as they haven't been able to produce magnesium, so one of their big clients that I think produces beverage cans stepped in and sued them because they're not getting the magnesium that they were promised in their contract. There was a judgment issued against U.S. Magnesium in that case. Some other contractors, including the one that was supposed to build the retaining wall for the waste pond, have sued. And collectively, at this point, I think they owe more than $70 million to various entities, and they also are behind on their royalty payments to the state and owe them a bunch of money there. So it seems like a big hole to dig themselves out of.
Mm-hmm. What's next? Anything? I think there's an administrative hearing coming up.
There's an administrative hearing on September 26th. I'm not sure if it's open to the public, but we'll follow up on that once we know. And then, in addition to what's next, I think the bigger picture here is U.S. Magnesium was the only primary producer of magnesium metal in the nation. And magnesium is a critical mineral. It's in all kinds of things, from beverage cans, like I mentioned, to aircraft, to car parts, to like all kinds of things. So now that China almost has a total monopoly on this market with U.S. Magnesium going out of production, there's a lot of concerns about what they could do, like dumping measures, just them controlling the price of this really critical mineral. I know has a lot of people nervous. So that's the story that I'm going to be working on next. Like, what does this mean in terms of supply of magnesium, as well as, the contamination, who's going to clean it up, who will pay for it. So stay tuned. Those stories will be coming.
All right, we'll look for that. Leah Larson's been telling us about this. We have a couple minutes here, Leah. Here's the headline: The Great Salt Lake Marina is being dredged again. Here's why. So the marina, I guess that's where you have your sailboat and such, and other craft. That's I think they had the dredging project back several years ago. They're going to do it again.
Yeah, and not necessarily do it again, but I guess kind of try to finish what they started. Yeah, this thing has been going in fits and starts. It turns out dredging marinas and salty lakes is really complicated. Yeah, I mean, I think they've been talking about this for nearly a decade. They've been trying to get this going, and I thought like, oh, they're back in there doing it again. The boats have been pulled. This will be an easy story I can file in like an hour, and but as things go with the Great Salt Lake, it's always a lot more complicated because you got so many divisions that are managing this. But yes, long story short, apparently the issue was the method that they were trying to use to dredge the marina the first time around, which was kind of a suction, I guess, method where they just kind of sucked the sediment from the lake bed and try to move it. It didn't work. The very salty, briny water of the Great Salt Lake caused some of the equipment to fail. Where they were replacing the dredge materials wasn't necessarily working. And so they're back at it again using a different method that hopefully works this time, because of course we need a functioning marina. I mean, like the sailors, of course, want to be able to launch their sailboats and enjoy that hobby, but it's more important for safety boats. All these boats that, like if a plane crashes out in the lake or a paddle boarder gets lost, they need to be able to deploy search and rescue boats, as well as we're doing a lot of critical research on the lake right now, or it's on such the brink of collapse. So we really need those boats to be able to get out there and do the research and the bird counts and salinity measurements that they need to do. So that's the primary motive behind dredging the marina.
There's another kind of subpart of your story here, Leah. It's a graphic. Great Salt Lake State Park visitation by year. So 2016, a lot of visitation.
Yeah.
Dropped off the ledge for 2017, stayed low until about this year. Why?
Well, okay, I'm going to have to speculate a little bit, because I mean, it could be like their method for counting visitors changed, but I don't know that that's the issue. But 2016, I think, was when they first shut down the marina for dredging. And I think that's why we saw it drop so dramatically. And then it stayed low, 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 low. And then suddenly international headlines started going out there about this lake and this resource, and like it kind of piqued international interest. So people really wanted to see it. And like that's one of the most accessible points for accessing the Great Salt Lake, I would say. Even with the marina being high and dry, you can walk to the water, you can enjoy all kinds of things. The park is great about hosting like moonlight walks and things. So I think interest just started to peak and peak and peak, and then it really took off this year. So I'm glad people are visiting the lake.
Yeah, it's international visitors as well. I guess they're coming back.
Yeah,
right?
that's what the state park said, that they're seeing those big tour buses of day trippers, international visitors, coming out in big buses and peeking around, checking out the lake, and yeah,
So
guess
finally,
they're back.
Leah, let's do the lake level watch. We're all it went to its all-time low. What, a couple of years ago?
Yeah, end of 2022 was when it hit its record low. So that was what, 4188.5. And we're at least when I wrote this story last week, we were at about 4191.5.
Yeah, and this is
So
the elevation, right? This is not the lake is not 4,000 feet deep, obviously. Yeah,
if only, no,
right.
yeah, that's above sea level. The lake is definitely, yeah, I think it's
in fact,
20 feet deep at its max. Yeah.
in fact, the lake is comparatively shallow.
Very shallow,
Yeah,
very big and very shallow, very
yeah,
unique lake.
yeah. Well, thanks, Leah, for telling us about these stories. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. Hope you'll be with me again next time.